Hello and welcome to this video on SQL triggers. A trigger in SQL is just a way to execute code when some kind of event happens in our database. We're going to look at row level triggers. So the events that we're going to look for are when an insert statement happens, a delete statement, or an update statement. So the three events that the trigger looks for is insert, update, or delete. Okay, and then depending on what happens and when it happens, we'll have code run. Okay, so let's get started. As usual, this is my setup. Here's my database that I'm going to be using, my notepad to write my SQL statements, and my console or command line for MySQL. Here's something new here. This will be explained in a few minutes. Now, this table here are grades. If you've been following along, you would know what these columns mean. The final grade percent represent these numbers right over here in this column. So if you got a 60%, you should get a letter grade of C. Anywhere from 60 to 64, you get a C. 65 to 69, give you a C+. 70 to 74, you get a B, etc. Okay? So, and if you've been watching if you saw my normalization video, you would know this column technically should not be in a database because it's what's known as a calculated column. In other words, if I know the grade percent, I already know what my grade letter is going to be. So I don't technically need it in here. And I put it in way back in the video on alter table to demonstrate the alter table statement of adding a new column. I left it in for this video for triggers so that I can demonstrate some interesting triggers. Okay, so I know technically it's not supposed to be there, but I'm going to keep it in there for demonstration purposes. Okay, so remember what I said, a trigger can be activated, or that's why they came up with the word trigger. It can be triggered when an insert statement happens, an update statement happens, or a delete statement happens. Okay, and you also have the option to activate triggers when the insert, before the insert happens, or after the insert happens, or before the update, or after the update, or before the delete, or after the delete. So you have triggers that happen before or after an event. Okay? So what we're going to do is create a trigger that does this. When we insert data into this table, all we have to do is supply the student ID, course ID, semester ID, and their final grade percent, and have the trigger calculate based on what percent you put in, what letter grade they should get. So I don't have to calculate that or figure that out. I'll let the system calculate it based on this and store the value in this column. Okay? So I made one minor change to our table. If you've been watching along, describe grade. First I have to use the database, use grades, set it as my default, and now I'll describe the grade table. And you'll see this is what I made a change to. This final grade letter, I took off the default value. Okay, that's what I did. So I wouldn't have a default of F. That's what I had before. I just wanted to remove it so it doesn't confuse you too much here. Okay, so now what I want to do is create a trigger that will, see when I do this, insert into grade, and we will populate the student ID column, the course ID column, the semester ID column, and the final grade percent with the following values for this insert. Let's do student ID of 2, course ID of 1, semester 2, and let's make it 3. And then we'll do a final grade. Let's pick 66. I don't know why I put a space there. It doesn't matter. So 66 is down here. It should be a C+. So technically, I'm only supplying this. I don't have a trigger yet. So if I just ran that statement, what I would do is get my data in there, temp, what is it called? Try.sql, And now it worked. Now let's see what it did. Select star from grade where student ID equals 2. You'll see it went in, but there was no final grade letter. So I would have to calculate that and look it up and figure out what it is. So instead of doing that, I'm going to create a trigger that when you did something like this, it would automatically populate the table or this column for me. So I'm going to delete that row now. Delete from grade where student ID equals 2. Get rid of that. So it's gone. You see that? There's nothing there now. Okay, so it's not there. So I'm going to get rid of this and create my trigger now. Okay, now one of the things you must remember is this. A trigger can only technically have one statement in it. Okay, you can't have multiple statements in a trigger. But there is a way around that, because having one statement in a trigger really can't do too much. So really what we want to do is put multiple triggers but fool the system basically. So what we want to do is run a statement called delimiter. You can do this at the command line anytime. Remember the delimiter in SQL, the default delimiter is the semicolon right here, down here, right there. The semicolon there tells you when the statement, tells the database system when the statement is finished. So I'm going to change it now that instead of using a semicolon, you have to use 2 forward slashes. Okay? So I'm going to do that temporarily. And then I'm going to create my trigger so that I did that delimiter for a reason, and I'll show you. So create trigger is the statement to create a trigger. Then you give it a name. This trigger I'm going to call BI grade letter. And the reason for that, you can call it whatever you want, but try to pick a naming convention. So these first 2 characters, or the prefix to my name, is BI stands for before insert. If it was an after insert, it would be an AI. If it was a before update, it would be BU, AU for after update, BD for before delete, and AD for after delete. So when I look at the name, I know immediately that that's being triggered before an insert. Okay, so it's create trigger, some kind of name. This trigger is going to execute before the insert statement happens. So when you execute an insert statement, the first thing it's going to do is run my code, then do the insert statement, basically. Okay, so create trigger before underscore grade letter. So create trigger, name of the trigger, type of trigger, before insert. So your options are before insert, before update, after update, before delete, or after delete. Those are your only options. Then you say on what table this trigger is going to be applied to. It's on the grade table. Okay? Now, you type in for each row. Always do that for a row level trigger. Just type it in. That just means this trigger will execute for every row in the database, in the table. Okay? So you type for each row. Now, this trigger technically has more than one statement. So to fool the system, basically, well, it's not fooling, this is what it was made for. You create a begin end block. So you type begin, and then type in the word end. And I put a few spaces there because I'm going to put some code in between. And then put your semicolon. Remember, the semicolon was originally the default delimiter. Do that, and then put the delimiter you put. So now what it's saying is this delimiter indicates the end of your statement. And then what I'm going to do is set my delimiter back to the default. Got to spell it right. Delimiter back to the default of a semicolon. Okay, so all this code is going to run, and what's in between this begin end. So between the begin end, you put all your code, and now you can technically put as many statements as you want, but the system treats anything between the begin end as one statement. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. Now what I want to do is this. let me pull up a file here that I created earlier. Okay, so I'm going to do what's called an if-else statement, and I'll explain it in a minute. And I'm just going to paste it in here because it's going to be a long thing. So if statements, I'm doing an if statement here. And the if statement says, if something happens, do this, else do something else. Let me pick another row for this. I'm going to continue. And you'll see, I'll explain it all. I'm just going to show a little bit of it. And then I'll put the rest in. Okay, there. So this is the way it works. And I'll put the end in there, just so I don't forget it later. And if. Okay, so this is the structure of an if statement. If this is true, then do this. If it's not true, do this if it's true. If it is, then do this. If not, do something else. If not, keep doing something else. So this is saying this. So that's what I'm going to do. Now I'm going to put everything in now, and then I'll go through the whole thing. Else if, and we'll put that there. Okay, so got the whole thing now. So it says if then something called new final grade percent is between 0 and 49.49 right here, then set the final grade, actually, yeah, 49, set the grade letter to F. If the final grade percent that you're trying to put in is between 49.5 and 54.49, then set it to a D. So we're following into all these ranges. So I've covered all these grade letters, and I've set the ranges. And the reason I use 0.49 and 0.5 is I'm rounding up. So if you're at 49.5, I don't give you an F, I give you a D, because you're closer to 50. I'm just rounding up, okay? And so forth. So if the final grade percent that you're trying to enter is between this, between this, if it is, it says then set the final grade letter to F. And if it's not, check this condition. If it is, then do that. If it's not, check this condition, so forth, all through the case. If none of these conditions match, put NA. That's the else part. They should all fit. They should all match that. But if someone put in 200, none of those meet, and it should be an NA, I know something's wrong. Okay, that's all that if statement does. You'll notice this word called new. What does that new word mean? Okay, that's what's called a pseudo record. Okay, and you have an option of using new or old. Okay, so let's go down here and I'll show you something. If I type in insert into grade student ID, comma, course ID, semester ID, and my final grade percent is 67. Sorry, I'm a little ahead of myself. Final grade percent, and my values are 213, 67. I'm doing an insert. This says, I haven't activated this yet, but when I do, this says, before I do the insert, because this is a before insert trigger, look at the new final grade percent value. The new for an insert is available because I'm about to put a new value in. This is the new value, 67, right here. Okay, that's the new final grade percent. So with an insert statement, I have access to new. That's anything new I'm about to put in. There's also an option of old, like this, but with an insert statement, there is no old. There is no old value. There's nothing existing in the table concerning this insert statement. So with an insert statement, you have access to the new, but not the old. With an update statement, you have access to both a new and an old. If this was an update statement instead, the new values are these new values that I'm about to put in. The old values are the values that are already existing in the row that I'm about to change. If I'm doing a delete statement, I have access to the old because data already exists in there that I'm about to delete. Oh, sorry, yes, that I'm about to delete. There is no new values with a delete statement because I'm not putting anything new into it. I'm only looking at the old. So it's like the existing columns. You can say, or sorry, values. You can say new and existing, but they call it new and old, okay? So with the insert, I have access to new. So here what I'm saying is if the new value that I'm about to put in, which is this value, 67, is between 0 and 49.49, then set the new final grade letter to F. I don't have to list it here, but I know there's a column for this row that I'm about to input, and I'm going to set it to an F. Okay? So let's do that. So let's first get rid of this statement. And let's create my trigger. So I'm going to save this statement that I created here, and I'm going to create the trigger. Source, I want to execute that, etemp \try.sql, and I have an error, of course. Okay, let's see what it is. Well, this was an easy one. I spelled delimiter wrong. D-E-L-I, delimiter. That was easy, and delimiter. Okay, let's save that, execute it again, and there. My says query OK, so that now the trigger has been created. I'm going to delete this now and do my insert statement and see what happens. Insert into grade student ID, course ID, semester ID, final grade %, final grade %, spelled correctly, values, a little paranoid with the spelling right now, 2, 1, 3, and 67. Take that space away. Now, let's save that and execute that. And it says OK. So let's see what got put in. Select star from grade where student ID equals 2. And you'll see C+ has been put in automatically because the trigger activated before I did the insert. It looked at the values I'm about to insert and then looked up the value for me for this column and put it in for me. Okay, so now I'm going to do the same thing in a minute with an update. Let's update a column. Let's update this. So let's change it. Update grade hold on. Say grade, which column? We'll do a set final grade %, final grade % equal to, instead of 67, let's change it. It should have been a 77, say. Okay. Which one do we want to upgrade or update? I mean, update where student ID equals 2 and course ID equals 1 and semester ID equals 3. We'll save that and run that. So this is what's originally here. Now I'm going to change this 67 to a 77. Okay, let's see what happened. There, it's a 77. But notice the final grade letter never changed because I didn't tell it what it should be. So why don't I create a trigger for updates also that will change it automatically based on what I put there. So this one's really easy because I just use the same code I did before, but now I just make it a update trigger. So create trigger, we'll do a before update. Change this to before update because it's the same thing. I just wanted to do the exact same thing. So the new value that I'm about to put in, if it's between that, set it to that. So now all I've done is use the exact same code and made it for before update also. So I saved that. Did I save it? Let's create that trigger by executing that code. Good, now it's there. Now I don't need this anymore. Now let's do an update now. Update grade. Set final grade percent. Final grade percent equal to, it wasn't supposed to be 77 actually, and it wasn't 67, it was meant to be a 57. He's getting worse. Which one do I want to do? Where student ID equals 1 and course ID equals 1 and semester ID equals 3, and that's it. Correct? I think that's correct. We'll know when I execute it. Yep. Okay, let's see what's in there now. So now it should have used that trigger for before update, looked up the new value I'm about to put in, 57, right there, and should have changed the column for final grade letter to a D+. So I should say see a D+. Final grade letter, did I set it right? Update grade set final grade percent equal to 57 where student ID equals 2, not 1. 2. That's the one I want. I updated something else. Okay, let's execute that. Now let's see that. There it is. That's the one I updated, D+. Okay, so now that's updated. So now I can insert an update to my heart's content. I don't have to supply the final grade letter. As long as I supply a grade percent, it will calculate my final grade letter automatically for me. So you can insert anything you want now. Insert into grade. Again, let's do the student ID, the course ID, the semester ID, and the final grade percent. And the values I'm going to supply that now are still the student 2, course ID is whatever 2 is, and in semester 1 he got a 83. Okay, I save that, execute it, no problem. Now let's look at this. Now I have 2 of him in there, and look, he got an A. 83 corresponds to an A. It put it in automatically for me. And if I want to update it, it will change it automatically. So there you go. Those are triggers. Remember, they're before, after, insert, update, or delete. Oh, let's drop a trigger. Okay. Once you've created a trigger, though, you can't modify it. Okay. What you have to do is drop the trigger and recreate it. So there is no alter trigger statement. You can't modify a trigger because it's already been embedded into the database, and you can't make a change to it. So what you have to actually do is drop it, and it's really easy. It's just drop trigger and then the name of the and then the name of the trigger. So we did a before update, and we'll drop the before insert. Before insert, what was it called? Grade letter, I think. Grade letter. I'll just execute that manually here, down here. Okay, I do that. It runs. Great. Let's do my insert now and see what happens. The trigger should be gone now. Insert into grade. Yeah, hit the caps lock. Sorry, guys. Grade, semester, student ID, course ID, semester ID, final grade percent. The values I want to supply are student 2 again. Let's do course 3 and semester 2. Yes, semester 2. And let's give him a grade of 66%. We'll execute that. Good. Now let's look at it. Here it is. We put it in, but notice the final grade no longer there. It's not being calculated because I dropped that trigger on the insert statement. Okay, so that's it for triggers, guys. If you like the video, please subscribe to the channel. Appreciate that, and any comments are always welcome. Thanks, guys, and have a great day. Take care.